Today's show is brought to you by the Pittsburgh Dance Council, a project of the Pittsburgh Cultural Trust. For more than 50 years, the Pittsburgh Dance Council has been bringing world-class contemporary dance performances to downtown. And the new season looks so fun. We're talking folks from Taiwan, Cuba, Mexico, France, LA, and New York. And tickets are available now for the upcoming season. Plus, we've got a special offer for CityCast Pittsburgh listeners. Use promo code DANCECAST for 30% off your tickets. The deal is only good through this Sunday, October 13th, so visit trustarts.org/dance to get your seats now.
Pittsburgh Opera presents Puccini's Tosca, October 5th through 13th. Claudia Tosca must free her lover from the clutches of a corrupt police chief. This whirlwind thriller packs romance, dark motives, betrayal, murder, and intrigue into a plot that will keep you on the edge of your seat. See why Tosca is one of the most powerful operas ever. Learn more at pittsburghopera.org/Tosca. Pittsburgh Opera, where can we take you?
Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, when it comes to police, we have all heard about bad apples. And every once in a while, an officer does something so egregious that the city fires them for it. When Jim Rogers, a black man in Bloomfield, was tasered so many times that he later died, that officer, Keith Edmonds, the one holding the taser, he lost his job. But then he went through his union and got it back. It's now gone to court, and he is still not back on the job. But that outcome, an officer doing something, getting fired for it, and not eventually getting reinstated with back pay, that is so rare in the city of Pittsburgh. Today, we are with Rich Lord of Public Source to talk about why. It's Wednesday, October 9th. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh is talking about. Rich, I feel like you and I have been talking about this all year, and going back before that, I'm so glad you've been working on this story that just dropped on publicsource.org. Let's start with Edmonds. Remind us what he did and this decision the courts just made to keep him out of the bureau.
Yeah, Keith Edmonds was the officer who famously responded to a call that came in related to the alleged theft of a bicycle in Bloomfield. The person Keith Edmonds encountered was Jim Rogers, of course. Edmonds used his taser multiple times on Jim Rogers, alleging that Jim Rogers was not being compliant with his orders. And Jim Rogers, after being transported to a hospital, died shortly thereafter. Edmonds then, of course, was the subject of a city disciplinary process, which we'll be talking about soon.
Yeah. I mean, and there was just a tremendous amount of evidence in this, too, because multiple officers responded, not just Edmonds, and many of them had body cam footage. There were bystanders. There were people with cell phones out. How did we get this system where police officers can get their jobs back after they're fired? Because I feel like for most of us, if you get fired from a job, like, you're done. You're not trying to go back to your workplace.
Yeah, there's an entirely different set of rules for police and firefighters in Pennsylvania. There's a state law that was enacted in 1968, which sets the parameters for the police and fire contracts that every municipality that has a police and fire unit goes through in order to get a contract with its union. In the case of Pittsburgh, quite a while back, the city and the officers union, the Fraternal Order of Police, negotiated contracts that describe a disciplinary process. If somebody gets disciplined, then there's a whole series of steps that the union can take to challenge that discipline. And if the city reaches a decision like terminating an officer that the union disagrees with, it can then go into arbitration, binding arbitration, which an arbitrator can then overturn the city's decision or support it or something in between.
I mean, what kinds of infractions are we talking about here? Like, what's the range? I feel like being involved in something that leads to someone's death is probably the end of that scale in terms of discipline.
Yeah, you and I looked at disciplinary
We
practices
did.
across the city for a couple of years in a row, Megan, and we saw everything from uniform violations to driving erratically, all the way on up to
I think sleeping on the job was one of my favorite ones from that old list. And I mean, the overnight officers, they park in a parking lot, they get tired.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. You get caught sleeping, you're subject to discipline. Maybe it's an oral reprimand, or maybe it's a warning. But the range of discipline that you can be subjected to, goes from just an oral reprimand or a retraining order, all the way through suspensions to termination.
Mm-hmm. But like, why are police and firefighters special? Like, why did our state government decided that they were worth protecting in exactly this way?
The argument is that if police or firefighters go on strike, we're all in deep trouble. So we got to
Huh.
do something to keep them from going on strike. And if you're going to, basically take away their right to strike, you got to give them something back. And what they were given was binding arbitration.
I feel like we would also be in a pickle if, like, our garbage collection folks went on strike too. Like that would be true of so many different industries here in the city. Well, when someone does get in trouble, they get fired, it goes to arbitration. Are the people then that decide whether they get to come back to work?
Each side picks one arbitrator, and the city typically picks a lawyer from its law department. The Fraternal Order of Police typically picks, a police officer, usually their union president, Robert Swartzwelder. And then there's a list of what are called neutral arbitrators. And it just kind of rotates through the list of neutral arbitrators. If, for instance, with the Jim Rogers case, the next arbitrator on the list received that case and became the neutral. And really, the neutral is the decider. The city guy always pretty much says, supports the city line. Obviously, the Fraternal Order of Police arbitrator supports the police line, and then the neutral really makes the decision.
That seems like so much power for one person to have. Do we know? Are they actually neutral? Like, what are their backgrounds? Do they have to go through a process like the rest of us would with like jury duty, for example?
Not to my knowledge. There's an arbitration association which produces lists, and traditionally, the city and the Fraternal Order of Police have taken arbitrators that are located in or near the city of Pittsburgh. And then there's a time limit on that list. Just recently, the list of arbitrators that produced the decisions we're talking about timed out, and a new set was picked by the city and the Fraternal Order of Police. A new set of, I think it's 8 or 9 arbitrators. And according to the city, it's a geographically more diverse group. So it'll include some folks who are from outside of the Pittsburgh area, from other parts of the state, who will then become neutral arbitrators. Don't really know whether it's a more diverse group in terms of background, but at least it's geographically broader.
And you use that phrase binding arbitration. It can't be totally binding because Edmonds was what they agreed to reinstate him, but he's not back. The courts have now gotten involved. How does that process then continue?
Yeah, either side, that if they disagree with the arbitration panel's decision, can take it to the Common Pleas Court. Then that court's decisions can be appealed to the Commonwealth Court. Then that court's decisions can be appealed to the state Supreme Court. So there's a whole series of potential appeals. And we've seen some cases that the city and the police union have fought going all the way to the state Supreme Court.
I mean, God, this seems like such an enormously expensive, time-intensive process.
Yeah, the city obviously has lawyers on staff. That said, it pays those lawyers. The Fraternal Order of Police argues that it has to pay its lawyers out of its union dues. And, there's suspicion on the police union side that the city is just dragging these things out in order to cost the union so much in legal fees that it can't fight them anymore. But so far, the union does continue to, go to bat for its officers at pretty much every level.
This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. With Halloween just around the corner, some of us have been thinking about masks, playing a part, doing it for the bit, but pretending to be someone else should be for fun, not for our emotions. If you feel like you've been overwhelmed and you've been trying to put on a brave face, maybe therapy can help. And I've been to therapy, and it's really nice to have someone to talk to without burdening your partner or your family or friends who, let's be honest, they love you to pieces, but can be out of their depth when you're clearly struggling with something and need a better outlet for those feelings. And sometimes just getting started can be the hardest part. BetterHelp can make finding someone so much easier. All you need to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched to a licensed therapist. The care is entirely online, so it's flexible to fit your busy schedule. Take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/CityCast today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/CityCast.
Hi, this is David Plotz of CityCast. Have you thought about a gift for yourself this year? One that has the power to help you grow and learn and become a better version of yourself? Give yourself the gift of language by getting Babbel. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by language experts, Babbel gets you talking a new language in 3 weeks. Because talking is the key to really knowing a language. And that's how Babbel approaches it. It's designed for real conversation. So I have a trip to France planned with my girlfriend. Was it inspired by the Olympics? Yes, it was. And it's given me the chance to revive my old high school French. And it's so fun to catch back up with the vocabulary I'd forgotten. To remember all the food, for example. I'm in a lesson on ingredients, so I'm going to make crepes with butter and sugar. Avec sucre et de beurre salé, on va se régaler. We're going to have a feast. They learned this great new French expression too. J'en ai l'eau à la bouche. That means I have water in the mouth. That means it's mouth-watering. Love it. Love French. Anyway, Babbel gets you talking, and studies from Yale and Michigan State University and other leading universities prove that it works. So here is a special holiday deal for CityCast listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast, spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Well, so what does this mean for Edmonds then? Like, will we see this keep going?
Yeah, we will. Almost immediately after Judge Hertzberg at the Common Pleas level ruled that the city does not have to return Edmonds to work, the Fraternal Order of Police filed an appeal to Commonwealth Court. I don't know if I've ever seen an appeal filed this quickly, Megan. Literally, as soon as I saw the decision, I saw the appeal. And so that will go up another level at least, and it could well go to the state Supreme Court too.
And then remind us, what's the reason why Edmonds isn't coming back?
I mean, the city argues that of all the 8 officers that were disciplined in relation to Jim Rogers' response, he was the most accountable, the most culpable, because he was the one who used the taser. 4 other officers were initially terminated in relation to how they handled the Jim Rogers incident. Several of them were involved with transporting Rogers or addressing or not addressing his medical needs on the scene. 3 of those officers won in arbitration, and the city did not appeal that to court, and they are back on the job. One of them just kind of said, okay, I'm done with this, and moved on with his life. And then Edmonds is the last remaining terminated officer. If ultimately Edmonds wins in appellate court, the city will be required to pay a significant amount of money for the time that he's not been working during this process.
Yeah, I mean, and that just seems to add to the expense. Like, Rich, every time one of these stories comes up and I see that, an officer has been involved in something, it's gone south, something terrible happened, their name is all over the news. And every time a court process like this carries on, their name keeps getting dragged through the news for months, sometimes years. To me, it seems like it might be more fruitful to just walk away. You had a bad experience at work, you go find another job. Is the pay, is literally just the pay and then the security of there's a pension at the end of the road if you stay with police long enough. Is that the reason why some of these officers fight this as long as they do?
Yeah, we talked with one former officer, Robert Kramer, who was already a disc jockey before he became a city officer, but wanted that security of a defined, he was a DJ. He wanted that security of a kind of defined salary and a pension. And, you work 20 years as an officer, you get a pretty good retirement package. And then he got mixed up in an alleged road rage incident, was terminated, was charged with a crime, beat all of that in court. The accusation against Robert Kramer really fell apart on scrutiny, and then eventually decided, hey, I don't want any part of law enforcement anymore. I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to be a DJ full time. But on the way towards that decision, he managed to cost the city close to $300,000 in back pay and wrongful termination money.
I mean, where does all of that money come from? Like, do we budget for potential court cases, or is that just like money that they would have earned if they'd been on the job and hadn't gotten in trouble?
Yeah, the calculation is usually based on what they would have made in terms of their kind of base salary and overtime over the course of the time they were off. It can be sometimes different because, as you know, Megan, from doing this for quite a while, there's you get a lot of kind of secondary employment as a police officer, standing outside of a construction site.
Yeah, you can pick up extra shifts for all kinds of like what they call special duty. Like, so any big public event, even private events like weddings, for example, if they're in a public space, you're required to have a police officer if you have alcohol on site. So they can pick up those shifts. There's just a ton of different ways they can use their police skills off the clock, but also sort of on the clock because they're in uniform.
Yeah. And the arbitrator can decide whether the officer is due the money that they might have made on this secondary duties or not. That can vary according to the city. But, if an officer is off 2 years fighting one of these cases, that can add up to six figures, even deep into the six figures in terms of back pay they're due.
Yeah. I mean, well, so say an officer does return. Does that mean they also get their old job as well?
And they're required to be made whole economically.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily brought back to exactly the same job. And the city has some discretion as to where they would place that officer. You and I have covered the case involving Officer Aaron Fetty. I'll just briefly describe it. The officer was accused of a sexual assault of another officer while off duty. And a civil court found that by a preponderance of evidence, Fetty committed that sexual assault. There was not any criminal charge filed at any level. That case is heading to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Aaron Fetty's been off for several years now. If the Supreme Court decides that, like the other courts have, the city needs to return this officer to work, there will be a really big back pay settlement in that case.
Yeah. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he goes back to the same job that he once had. That part is, if I'm getting this right, is up to the discretion of the public safety director and the police chief.
That's right. And in that case, that officer would be constrained as to where they might serve because they can't serve near the other officer who was the victim in the case.
I mean, should the city, from your reporting, should the city be fighting more to keep these guys away from the Pittsburghers that, maybe feel some type of way about seeing this name? Like if you call the police and someone comes because you're in trouble and you see a name that you have seen in the news over and over and over again, that doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
This particular administration, Mayor Ed Gainey's administration, is fighting more than prior administrations have. I think some other administrations have taken the tack that, hey, we're going to lose this case anyway. So why drag it through multiple iterations of court processes? When we're going to just increase the back pay bill, we have to eventually pay to this officer if we lose in arbitration. But this administration is going further, and they've worked in some new contract provisions, which might give them a better track record going forward.
What are some of those provisions?
It's called a matrix. Essentially, if an officer violates a bureau policy, the city looks at what the policy was and what that officer's past history was, and that kind of determines what the punishments should be, anywhere from a reprimand to termination. There's also a series of what they call terminable offenses, kind of in the mid-teens, 15 or 16 of them, depending on how you count them. And if an officer is found to have violated those policies, they're automatically in the termination track. So whereas previously the city could say terminate an officer and then it would go to arbitration and then they'd argue with the union about whether the punishment was consistent with past practices or not. Now it's kind of like, okay, where does it fit on the matrix? Is it a terminable offense? And it should be a much easier decision for the arbitrators and hopefully for the courts too.
And does the matrix retroactive, or does it start at a specific date?
It started in March of 2023, and it has not been tested in arbitration yet, but it is in effect. So undoubtedly it'll be tested sooner or later.
So not for Edmonds, but for future officers.
That's right, because the Rogers incident occurred in 2021. Matrix doesn't apply.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess, Rich, kind of stepping back from all of this, broadly, if someone asks you why cops who do bad things stay on the job, the answer is kind of the union and the city's own rules. Is that how you would explain it?
The rules are really driven by that 1968 Act. It's almost cut and pasted. Here's what the arbitration process is in the state law. Here's what it is in the city contract. The union is always going to fight to protect its members to the extent that it can under the law. The law says, hey, if you don't protect your members to the nth degree, they can come after the union. So obviously the union is going to fight really hard for those members, especially when there's a termination involved. And because the playing field is set by that, how many year old, 54-year-old state law, 56-year-old, something like that.
We won't hold you to the math.
Old state law. The union is often going to win.
But why haven't we changed it? Like, why has that piece not evolved over the last 56-ish years?
Yeah, evolution doesn't happen easy in the Pennsylvania General Assembly, obviously, and particularly on an issue in which there are union interests on one side, things are going to be slow. The police union, of course, has support on a bipartisan level. It's a union, and Democrats are naturally kind of partial to unions. It's law enforcement, and Republicans often trumpet their support for law enforcement. So anything the police union opposes is going to have really difficult sledding in Harrisburg. There are proposals to change the Act, Act 111 of 1968, but and occasionally a lawmaker will get courageous and actually introduce one of these proposals as legislation, but they've gone absolutely nowhere because of that dynamic.
We'll have a link to Rich's great story in our show notes. You can also find it at publicsource.org. Rich, thank you so much for this reporting and for so much more.
Great being here, Megan. Thank you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. If you're liking the show, please tell someone, rate us, leave us a nice review, and make sure you're subscribed to that Hey Pittsburgh newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Talk to you soon. It's Wednesday, October 19th. No, it's not. Can't keep up with the dates, Rich.